Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the May edition of the ABA Engineering Academy Engineering Webinar Series. We produce these things each month on the third Tuesday of the month, and it's a joint venture of the Alabama, also the Georgia and South Carolina Broadcasters Association. And so we appreciate them joining in with us to make this possible. We also want to remind you that we are actually underwritten by MaxConnect Group. We invite you to check them out at www.maxconnect.com and look at all the services they offer. They have all kind of services, including sales of broadcast equipment and services of broadcast equipment. They also do turnkey installations, so make sure you contact them. And when you do, make sure that you thank them for being a part of the ABA Engineering Academy's webinar, plus all the other activities that the Academy puts on. Our co-host, John George, who is normally with us at this time, is actually on his way to Syracuse, I think he said. I never know where that guy's going, so I think that's where he said he was going, was up to Syracuse today. So let me just share real quickly a couple of notes before we actually get in and speaking with our guest, and that is concerning EAS. As most of you know, there is some changes coming up with EAS this year. The FCC has mandated some changes to take place, and in order for these changes to take place correctly, everybody needs to make sure that their EAS device is operating with the most up-to-date version of the software. I know Sage Indec has announced that they will have their updated software up sometime around July. So you need to make sure that you're running the current version, which is 95.00. This update, not only from Sage, but from DASDEC and Gorman Redlick as well, has to be installed by, I think the date is December 12th of this year, 2023. But we encourage you, don't wait to the last minute to download it and install it on your equipment. So one other thing would like to mention is to remind people around the engineers that we are going to be hosting again an ABIP training seminar. We did one of these back in 2019 to a packed house here in Birmingham. And so we've been asked by a number of people to repeat that. So we've got that scheduled for July 10th and 11th. And now it's not just for people that are inspectors or wish to become inspectors, but it's open for anybody that would wish to attend. So you can visit our website at aba.ba.com and click on the engineering tab and see the registration for that. Well, our special guest today is a really good friend of mine, Paul McLane, who Paul is with the Radio World, and I know that he, with Radio World, along with all the other things that his company produces, they do a great job of keeping the engineers around the country updated on technical stuff and legal stuff. And Paul, first of all, let me thank you for being with us today.
Totally. Thank you very much for having me, Larry. It's a privilege, a real pleasure. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah, we had you here last year, I think, to talk about what happened at the NAB convention out in Las Vegas. And of course, we just got through with one just last month, and I think they had over 65,000 people in attendance. But like myself, I was not able to attend, and I'm sure a number of you on the call probably didn't get to attend as well. So we contacted Paul and asked him if he would join us today and talk about what went on in Las Vegas. Well, we don't want to share everything. What happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas, but, but what was going on actually on the floor and in the booths of the NAB. And I guess to start off with, every year at the convention, there's some sort of buzzword going on. And what would you say buzzword for this year actually was.
I think it's a toss-up, Larry. I think it's going to be either artificial intelligence or the future of AM radio in the car. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that here in a moment in my slides, but those two topics I think are continue to be really front of mind for people in radio, at least for me and my job and the people that I talk to who are thinking about what's coming and what the implications are.
Yeah, there's always when you go, you see a lot of new equipment. You hear a lot of new acronyms, I call them, that's floating around in this business, which is just amazing. It's to try to keep up with all those things. And the greatest thing that I've found about attending an NAB convention is networking with you guys, networking with friends from other stations. And that's what I got out of the NAB when I go is the networking part of it, in addition to seeing everything. So I'm going to turn the program over to you and let you share some things that you saw and heard at the convention this year.
Well, I appreciate it. So let me see if I'm successful here at bringing up my slides. All righty. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, got it.
Wonderful. Well, Larry, it's an utter privilege to be invited. Thank you. And thanks for all that you do for broadcasters, not only in Alabama, but around the United States. I'm going to try to give a flavor of the show and a sampler of the storylines that we've been covering. And this is mostly about radio, although some of the material crosses over to TV and beyond. I do like to start with a look at broader industry storylines in regulation and technology that were on the minds of people at the show, and then we can look at a sampler of some specific products that we saw there. But as I mentioned, to me, there are two obvious candidates for the storyline of the year. Let me move this out of the way here. There we go. Two obvious candidates, and one of them is artificial intelligence. Now let's see if I can get my screen moving down here. There we go. Now, AI and radio isn't exactly new. It's already been used in various ways, but mostly behind the scenes. And we've seen synthetic voice being demoed on the show floor for a couple of years now. But AI, of course, really blew up in the wider business world this winter with all the attention on generative AI tools like DALL-E and Chat GPT. Then in February, Futuri grabbed everyone's attention with its announcement of Radio GPT. That's Daniel N. Standig, the CEO. He calls Radio GPT the first fully AI-powered radio host. This is a system that lets a station create multiple synthetic voices, host voices, with various personalities, and then build a radio show or pieces of content where AI hosts are talking about your local trending topics. At the show, Radio GPT was demoed in a suite, not on the floor, but you could learn about it in various sessions. And I have a promotional sample here. These are all synthetic voices.
Radio GPT.
Immerse your radio listening experience with artificial intelligence.
100% AI.
We'll assemble compelling information.
We'll offer highly engaging data.
And we'll do it 24/7.
I'm completely AI.
So am I.
Me too.
We all are.
We're your entertainment assistants.
100% generated by artificial intelligence.
This
is Radio
GPT.
Now, there's a lot to unpack here. And of course, the headline question that everybody asks is this going to take away DJ jobs? And even Futuri acknowledges it probably will, but the company is positioning this as a tool to help radio be live and local. Well, how is that possible? This is how the company explains it. Its system creates a link to your automation system, and it uploads your music logs so it can generate your breaks. And then a tool called Topic Pulse monitors 250,000 sources online, including social media and various news sources, to figure out what's trending in your market. Then it applies GPT-4, and you know what Chat GPT is about, so you've probably heard about that tool, but it applies that technology to create a script around that, and then a separate synthetic voice system generates the voices. So the bot jock can talk about your city's weather and sports, or tease your playlist and interact with your other AI hosts, and it can adopt personalities that you want to give it. You might say that one voice is a male voice of a millennial with a hyper personality, and the next voice is a laid back woman who's from the boomer generation. And it can do all this in multiple languages. Now, this is going to raise a lot of questions. Is it convincing? Should you tell listeners about it? Should you tell listeners that some of the voices on your station are generated by AI? Just how far are radio companies going to go with using this? Daniel Anstandig says we should think about this tool as your best ever super producer or a co-host. And he points out that it can free up employees to spend more time building relationships with listeners and advertisers. Well, the cynic in me says we've seen a lot of commercial radio companies use tools to simply cut costs. We'll see where this goes. But his argument that AI is coming anyway to the world of audio is pretty compelling. And he says radio needs to keep up. Just one example, Spotify introduced its own AI DJ on the same day that Radio GPT was announced earlier this year. If you follow AI news, you know that some leading tech executives have called for a pause in the development of broader AI in our society, and hoping that society can understand the implications better before it really takes hold. But while some companies seem to want to go slow, iHeartMedia apparently is not among them. There's Bob Pittman, the CEO on the left. That photo is at the convention with Angela Yee. But Pittman said something 2 weeks ago on the company's business call with analysts. We plan to use AI to its fullest. I think AI can fundamentally change the cost structure of the company. I think we'll do stuff faster and our costs will be lower. We think AI will be a major productivity enhancer for American businesses, and we plan to use it to its fullest. Exactly what shape that will take is not clear, of course, so stay tuned. Futuria is not alone. Super Hi-Fi also had a suite in Las Vegas, and it announced a service called Program Director. It's making big claims for this platform. It says Program Director reimagines the workflow for curating, programming, and scheduling radio experiences. Among other things, it does AI-assisted playlist creation and synthetic voice tracks using ChatGPT and a technology called 11 Labs. One of our Radio World contributors got a demo of this at the show and said they're taking the quality of automation and making it sound more live and mixing better to a level that it's never been. He says it's particularly effective at segues and song overlaps, and that the system is smart enough to listen to beats and pitch and gender to create an intelligent mix. It's a little hard to compare these kind of tools right now. The next few months will be interesting. And if you're interested in any of these, I encourage you to contact those companies because they generally will have online demos that you can request. We're seeing AI in other places too. There's a company, Radio Workflow, that put out a tool called Write My Ad. Yep, it'll write your ad. There's another company, Adthos, that offers a self-service portal where you can generate your own audio ads. And Enco Systems was already using AI for things like transcription, and they have expanded their AI-based tool set as well. Now, Curtis Leggett, the head of NAB on the right there, he spoke about the potential dangers of artificial intelligence because, of course, AI was in the news across the show communities, not just in radio. He worries that big tech will take broadcast company content without compensating broadcasters. And this is a big discussion point within the world of generative AI, is where the content originally came from. He worries about the danger to journalism too, but he says there's benefits of efficiencies at stations where resources are really tight. But Fred Jacobs, the consultant on the left there, he sees a pattern of radio becoming so reliant on technology and its requirements that he says a station can lose its sense of purpose and its humanity. And that's one reason radio sounds so similar up and down the dial or across the country. There's much bigger issues with AI, of course, and our society is going to have to take some hard thinking about this. Fake voices are just going to be one of many, many, many issues. And there's been much debate about whether artificial general intelligence will come to pass and whether machines eventually will be able to think, as you and I use the term. I really recommend this book, Scary Smart, came out about 1.5 years ago. Mo Gaudat was a former executive at Google X. And he says there are 3 inevitables. AI is going to happen on a large scale. It will be smarter than humans in the sense that it can process so much information and have access to that information very quickly. And he says, we know it's inevitable. Bad things are going to happen. So we should be planning about this now. He says we're much closer to having to confront these questions. And it's not clear whose interests the machines will have at heart. And if you watched science fiction movies when you were growing up, you're accustomed to thinking about that. It's a little closer to reality, I think, than we all appreciate. This is the other storyline of the year, and unfortunately, it's not a pleasant subject. I'm sure everybody listening to me knows about this, but it was on the minds of everybody at the NAB show. We already knew that some makers of electric vehicles were taking AM radio reception out, claiming that they couldn't keep noise out or that it would be too expensive to do it. Senator Ed Markey raised the profile of this issue over the winter by sending letters to all the major car manufacturers, and he asked them specifically to report back to him on whether they had removed AM radio from electric vehicles and whether they had any plans to do so. Markey did a big service for radio just by doing that, by channeling this conversation in that way. At least 8 car makers said they have indeed removed AM radio from electric vehicles. Those names include Tesla, Ford, BMW, Mazda, and Volkswagen. But then Ford dropped its own little bomb. We learned earlier this year that gas-powered Ford Mustangs will no longer have AM radio. And when news companies asked them about it, Ford put out this statement: a majority of US AM stations, as well as a number of countries and automakers globally, are modernizing radio by offering internet streaming through mobile apps, FM, digital, and satellite. Ford will continue to offer these alternatives for customers to hear their favorite AM radio, music, news, and podcasts, as we remove amplitude modulation, the definition of AM in this case, from most new and updated models we bring to market. Oh, that landed like a turd in a punch bowl. So does this mean the end of AM radio? Are car makers going to decide they don't need to offer it in any models? And can AM radio survive? Well, if you read our free morning newsletter, our Smart Brief newsletter every day, you know that industry broadcast organizations are scrambling. The NAB has launched a campaign to get broadcasters and listeners to tell Congress they want to protect AM. You can text that number there, 52886, to tell Congress to keep AM radio in cars. And organizations like the National Alliance of State Broadcasters Associations, the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, the National Association of Black-owned Broadcasters have all been getting on this issue. The Alliance of State Associations did a helpful survey, heard back from more than 1,000 AM stations, like a quarter of the AM stations in the country, and it came up with some good, fresh data that you might find interesting. There's this notion that AM is dominated by talk, conservative talk specifically, and there's plenty of it. But the survey also found that AM radio formats are more diverse than a lot of people think. 40% of stations, 40% have music from classic country and oldies to Spanish, regional, Mexican, and inspirational gospel. And AM, of course, is critical for religious broadcasters like Salem, and still the home of sports coverage in certain markets. The state associations are also reminding Congress that AM radio still plays a crucial role in the emergency alert system, as most people on this webinar will know already, with those primary entry point stations around the country. And really, when you think about it, when there's a hurricane or a tornado and people lose internet and cell service, what's the first thing the government tells people to do? Tune in to the radio to find what's going on. So these trends definitely undercut that. The state associations also found out that a lot of AM stations don't have FM translators at all, a lot. And quite a few don't have their own mobile apps and don't participate in online radio aggregators. So it's simplistic for the car makers to say that people can find all their AM station content on other platforms. Just yesterday, we learned that 100 members of the US House of Representatives have sent letters to major car makers urging them to maintain AM. And I thought it was interesting that the legislators reminded the car makers that they have been beneficiaries of federal subsidies, loans, and tax incentives. So we'll see where that goes. There seems to be some effective lobbying going on by NAB and others. And there has been some conversation that Congress conceivably could require car makers to keep broadcast radio in the car as a safety feature. I personally don't see that happening. I could be wrong. That's just my opinion. I think there's too many obstacles to it, but there is a congressman pursuing that. And in the back of all these conversations is, if you drop AM, what's to say you wouldn't drop FM? You know, and it becomes a lot easier to change car infotainment systems now that all of these are done in software. So these systems can be updated even after you drive your car off the lot. They can change what's built into the software. On the topic of consuming radio and how people listen, Jacobs Media released data from its latest tech survey of core radio listeners, and it found that AM and FM car radio does still make up the majority of in-car audio use, but the demographics tell an important story. These slides are showing the percentage of time spent in a car with various types of media for baby boomers on the left and Gen Z on the right. Broadcast radio is in the green slice of the pie. So if you compare the green slices, you see how much smaller the green is for the younger demographic. Young folks do still use radio a lot, but the slices for streaming and audiobooks and their own music are bigger. And remember, this survey is among core radio listeners, not the overall population. So you have to read this as saying, even among core radio listeners, in-car consumption leans now toward digital and satellite. Overall, Jacobs found that the trend of people listening to radio more over digital channels continues to grow. This is the percentage of time that core radio listeners spent with a favorite station in a typical week by over-the-air broadcasting in blue and digital platforms like streaming and smart speakers in green. And you can just see the trend there is absolutely unmistakable. Meanwhile, in other tech news, One Media Systems at the NAB show gave an update of its proof of concept project showing how audio-only services, including radio content, could be delivered over ATSC3 television bandwidth. One Media is the tech development arm of Sinclair Broadcast Group, and it says that with an efficient Fraunhofer codec, one next-gen television station could also add to its bandwidth 40 or even 50 channels of audio-only content. You would need compatible reception devices, but if this were to take off, it would be another way for radio companies to distribute their product. Liam Power is a systems engineer at One Media. That's him in the picture on the left. And he won the NAB Best Paper Award for his presentation on this. Also at the show in the Broadcast Engineering Conference, David Layer of the NAB gave a presentation about field tests of higher power HD radio FM. You may know that NAB and Xperi have asked the commission to update the formula for allowing stations to operate up to digital power levels of 10 dB below carrier. David Layer says the field tests confirmed that the current formula is too conservative. He said the proposed change would allow increased digital power without creating interference problems. That map is from his presentation, and that request is still pending at the FCC. David Layer was also on the receiving end of some news. The Association of Public Radio Engineers presented him with his Meritorious Service Award. APRE said that in the midst of the dramatic changes in our industry over several years, David Layer has been a great and supportive colleague to the public radio engineering community. His service to all broadcasters has been exemplary. I would second that, and Radio World has honored him with our own award in years past. Scott Hanley is the new president of APRE. He's at the left holding the award, and Ralph Hogan is at right. The Dream Foundation grants wishes for terminally ill adults. David Whitehead is a former radio serviceman in the US Air Force and later chief engineer for the Cesar Chavez Foundation's radio network. He also worked as an audiovisual equipment repairman and telecommunications agent. He wanted to attend the NAB show, see some new products, and catch up with friends. He and his wife, Bonnie, attended the show with support from the NAB and the Dream Foundation, including 4-night stay at a hotel in town, and they met with Curtis Leggett of the NAB. The North American Broadcasters Association has put out a guidance document that is of interest on the subject of hybrid radio and metadata, and they issued a list of recommendations. They say that FM stations should at least adopt static RDS tools, and ideally both static and dynamic metadata with RDS. And they encourage AM and FM stations to adopt HD radio IBOC, the hybrid mode, and follow metadata best practices. This is a message, of course, that you've probably heard from that organization and others before, but it's reinforcing this message that radio is more and more becoming a visual product, and that we have to put out content, including metadata, that keeps that in mind. You can download that report at that link there, nabanet.com. I recommend it because the report gives a nice overview of what hybrid radio actually is and who the players are. And so if you've ever wondered how radio DNS relates to DTS AutoStage or Radio Player Worldwide or Radio Line or Q, this is a good document, nabitnet.com. The FCC chairwoman was there at the show. Jessica Rosenworcel announced a Future of Television initiative. It's a public-private effort led by the NAB to boost the rollout of next-gen television. But I include her here because on a less friendly note, right after the show, the NAB went to a federal court and asked it to force the commission to finish its 2018 quadrennial review of media ownership rules already. The FCC is already doing the next one 4 years later, and the 2018 one isn't done. And NAB's basic point is, how can you do that? How can we even comment on the one without the other? NAB accuses the commission of a perpetual slow roll and flagrantly ignoring the mandate of Congress. Of course, the NAB's endgame here is that it would like the FCC to decide that local subcap limits on how many stations a radio group can own in a given market, that those subcaps should be eliminated or lifted. Rosenworcel, meanwhile, probably has no reason to hurry on this, given the political deadlock on the commission right now. Also in Las Vegas, but not attached to the show, the Society of Broadcast Engineers expanded its spring Ennis workshop to a 2-day event held separately from the NAB show. Fred Baumgartner and Andrea Cummins are there, welcoming a happy crowd. The workshop featured tracks on the basics of RF and on next-gen broadcast, and it drew more than 100 people between the events. For the TV track, the SBE collaborated with the ATSC and offered a special certification exam for those holding the prerequisites to take the ATSC3 certification exam. You know, all efforts toward education in our industry are good, as Larry Wilkins will testify. The SBE also elevated Stephen Brown of Woodward Radio Group to the membership rank of Fellow. Brown started his broadcast career in 1975 as a part-time announcer and engineer at WAPL AM/FM. His boss said he's able to interact with all personality types, from sales to programming. He's able to describe the why in very relatable terms, and he consistently demonstrates patience with people. He plans to retire next year, and Fellow is the highest rank that SBE members can achieve. You know, Larry mentioned networking, and I agree with it. The NAB is just a world-class place for networking. Preliminary attendance total 65,000. That compares to last year's of around 53,000. The show is working its way back, still not at pre-pandemic levels. Much of the radio activity now is in the West Hall, but there were a number of radio booths in Central, and there will be again next year. By the way, the North Hall next year of the Las Vegas Convention Center will be closed during the 2024 convention. There's a 2-year renovation project. The facade of the convention center will be updated, and then the next year, the Central Hall will be closed. But I think it's interesting to consider that someone who didn't attend last year would have gone at least 4 years without going to the show because of the pandemic. That's quite a stretch not to see your friends. But I like that photo up top center. That's Jeff Williams of Yellowtech visiting the history banners. And that's his dad, Jack Williams, famous for his role at the old PR&E. So what about the exhibit floor itself? Several transmitter manufacturers introduced new products. Nautel showed a new iteration of its flagship FM transmitter line. Its slogan, just add audio, and the phrase seems suitable given how much is built in. The transmitters integrate all HD radio components, including Xperi Gen 4 importer, exporter, and XGen implementations for HD radio encoding, station logo, and artist experience. It also locks FM and HD signals synchronously to eliminate that problem of HD FM blend drift. Meanwhile, there's processing in it. Omnia for Nautel handles FM and HD radio audio processing and provides live-wire AOIP inputs. Basically, Nautel says, as long as there's an IP audio feed available at your transmitter site, operation is audio in, RF out. No external boxes, processing, or GPS required. One thing Nautel's hoping is that the simplicity of this will encourage a fresh wave of HD radio adoptions. I also love that picture because of the excellent shirts. WorldCast Systems is the parent of the Acriso transmitter line, and it showed its expanding family of FM AIO series transmitters. This line is now available at power levels like 100, 300, 600 watts, as well as 1 kilowatt, all in 2 rack spaces. US pricing starts at about $6,700. Now, there's a certain theme that we are hearing a lot among manufacturers: more software, less hardware, more reliance on software. And this is a good example. This transmitter is available with an integrated automat RDS encoder, multiband processing, and APT IP decoder. And it's available with Smart FM software. Smart FM, that's a technology that you've probably heard about. It's been around for a while, but it's taking a higher profile because it uses artificial intelligence to manage RF power levels dynamically. The goal there is to improve operating efficiency. WorldCast says you can achieve significant cost savings this way. And in fact, the NAB this year launched a new award specifically to honor sustainability efforts. And WorldCast earned one of those awards for Smart FM. There's been a lot of activity in lower power compact FM transmitters. Gates Air rolled out a line of air-cooled solid state FM transmitters. This is analog only. It first showed these at IBC last fall. Particularly of interest to broadcasters who are looking to refresh an existing FM infrastructure with systems in large regional and national networks. Power levels are 50 watts, 1 kilowatt, 5 kilowatt, and 10 kilowatt versions so far. The 1 kilowatt transmitter has a starting price of $7,900. Gates Air points out its power density in 5 rack units and an overall efficiency rating of up to 76%. And this family supports N+1 configurations, which is helpful for those large national network operators. Here's a theme we've been seeing on a number of products. This is available optionally with an Intraplex IP link module that enables direct receipt of contributed FM content, so you don't need an external codec. It also was the first NAB show, by the way, since Gates Air was acquired by Thomson Broadcast. You might remember that last year, that news broke just at the show that the acquisition was coming up. Their new CEO, Barbara Spicek, was at the show. Speaking of ownership changes, it's been 5 or 6 years since Elenos acquired Broadcast Electronics, and fans of BE have been watching to see how the brand would evolve. The company made an important move this winter when it brought in Rich Redmond as its president and CEO, responsible primarily for the operations in the Americas, and Tim Hardy joined as senior RF systems architect. Redmond and Hardy are well known to transmitter buyers from their roles at other manufacturers, so it seems we can expect BE to try to take a higher profile. At this show, Elenos unveiled a transmitter platform called Quick Block. They're seeking to take modularity up a notch or two. They use these simple building blocks like you see on the left, and they can scale a transmitter from 1 kilowatt to over 50 kilowatts for analog and HD radio FM. And the platform also will support other digital radio and TV standards. They showed a 50 kilowatt model in a single 19-inch rack, that's on the right, playing up the potential savings in space and leasing costs. Everything is pretty much modular: controllers, power supplies, RF amplifiers, and exciters. An engineer can even get a module test fixture to speed up field repairs and troubleshooting. But it wasn't just transmitters. Processing is a category with a lot of new entrants. Orban will begin shipping a new generation of processors soon, with the Optimod 5950 first off the assembly line. The company calls this Bob Orban's first clean sheet of paper processor design since the 8400. It is a hardware box, as you can see. The company does also offer software, processing in software, Linux-based servers, or in the cloud, but it says many of its customers do still want hardware. It is a single rack device, as you see, and it has MX peak limiter technology, subharmonic synthesizer, and multipath mitigator. It uses a touch display, and it can be controlled remotely via any HTML5 browser. This is for FM and DAB or HD radio broadcasts, and there is an optional micro MPX interface. List price, $99.95, and it's sold on the street for about $9,200. Also in processing, Omnia showed the Forza. This should please those folks who think that radio stations don't pay enough attention to their streams. It's a software-based processor for streaming as well as HD radio and DAB. To help those users who may not have a lot of technical skill, it includes Omnia presets and a single-page user interface with smart controls. And for streamers specifically, it has a LUFS loudness controller. Forza means force or strength or power. The Forza multi-band container is a software product that's available as a buyout or yearly subscription. The buyout is $1,295. The yearly subscription starts at $695. The pricing may vary depending on your requirements. More processing. Sound 4 was in the Broadcast Depot booth, and it showed a virtualized version of its flagship audio processor. This is called Impact CL for cloud, presumably. It's for HD radio, DAB, and other digital applications. Features include a 2-band AGC, stereo FX, tone FX, declipper, 6-band processor, 4-band EQ, and a final brick wall limiter. You'll notice several of these products show the important trend of radio functions being offered as a service. You buy this processing by paying a monthly service fee. Wait, even more processing. Wheatstone added a hardware FM processor to its audio arts line. It's called the Lion. The Lion. It's for FM and HD radio. It costs $2,500, and it promises professional on-air quality even from highly compressed material. It includes stereo enhancement, RDS, and system link for transporting MPX and HD signals across high-speed data links. Also, Wheatstone added the Audio Arts Voice One processor, promising a warm, robust vocal presence. This is a WheatNet IP audio network device with routable inputs and outputs and logic control, particularly notable for its sibilance correction. This box costs $1,500. Wheatstone also featured a cloud version of its Layers Stream module running on Amazon Web Services. So again, we see this trend. The software includes stream provisioning, audio processing, and metadata support. Wheatstone showed streaming instances running in the cloud that could be quickly brought up and torn down and controlled through a simple user interface like a browser. It's part of its Layers software suite, and it also has modules for running instances of FM and HD processing and mixing, either in the cloud or on-premise. Virtualization is a trend that continues to make itself felt. Telos Alliance also showed Axia Altus. This is a virtual mixing console. It promises to bring the features of the traditional console to your desktop or your laptop or smartphone. And it provides mixing, and it integrates with Telos broadcast phone systems. This is delivered as a Docker container. It can be used on or off premises with commercial off-the-shelf hardware. And Telos says that the tool is particularly good for situations where you want to deploy quickly, like setting up a temporary studio, building a disaster recovery center, or doing a remote broadcast. You can pay for it on an ongoing basis or a one-time buyout. Something I've been particularly interested in is the new broadcaster portal that was rolled out by Xperi for its DTS AutoStage stations. This is the company's hybrid radio platform, and Xperi has been working to get it into as many car dashboards as possible, and also to get broadcasters to sign up for free and provide the appropriate metadata. Now, pardon me, I should add, by the way, that Radio World has partnered with Xperi on a couple of ebooks about its platform, but I think there's a lot of reasons to be impressed with it. It's all about trying to keep broadcast radio looking current and visible while adding features too, like personalization and lyrics. And one of the big selling points is the analytics that a hybrid system is supposed to feed back to you via the IP pipe. So the launch of the broadcaster portal was an important step for DTS AutoStage. And one of the things you can do on your dashboard is to see heat maps like this, showing where listeners were when they were listening to your station. Here's one in Syracuse. The orange and yellow zones show the most intense listening over a 1-month period, Monday to Friday period. You can see that if you look closely at the top, that you can select the days and which broadcast channel you're monitoring or that you're measuring. And you can see that there are other hotspots out on the perimeter, and this would be very valuable information. You can overlay a map like this with retailer locations and show a client the proximity to a station's audience. This one is an FM station in Prague, and you can see that a user can zoom in and get a closer look. And remember, this is based entirely on the listening by people who have cars with DTS AutoStage. So while it's very interesting, and I think you could play all day with something like this to see where your listeners were, you're constantly reminding yourself it's listeners that have DTS AutoStage, and it'll become more effective over time as more cars roll out with this platform. Right now, it's in 52 car models from 5 manufacturers. And Xperi just said that they've got an announcement for a major Japanese car company coming up sometime soon. Another tool that you can look at, by the way, is this day part analytics. And I mean, this is just, you know, a programmer's dream to be able to dig in and see exactly when the most people were listening and how they behaved with different kinds of content. Xperi will tell you, look, we're not competing with Nielsen. This is more of a complementary programmer's tool, but clearly it's at least complementing Nielsen, and Xperi points out that the data gets to users much more quickly than with Nielsen. A few more samples from the floor. Tieline unveiled 2 MPX codecs. These offer composite FM multiplex codec solutions for network distribution of FM MPX or micro MPX signals to a transmitter site. Sending transmission-ready FM composite allows your station to keep the audio processing and the RDS gear down at the studio. MPX1 is for transmitting a composite STL signal from one station with return monitoring, and it retails for around $4,000 US. The MPX2 can transport 2 discrete composite FM MPX signals and costs around $6,000. These products will ship later this year. Larry mentioned this. Digital Alert Systems will release software updates for its DASDEC systems. I mentioned them specifically because they were exhibiting at the show. Part of the reason is to comply with a deadline that the FCC set for December to implement upgrades for the clarity and accessibility of EAS messages. DAS actually has 2 updates, both of which should be out by next month. The cost varies depending on which version of DASDEC you have and whether you're on their software plan. Sage Alerting didn't have a booth, but I know they too have a software update coming next month that will cost most NDEC users $159. Regardless of who your EAS vendor is, you should check in with them soon to make sure you can get the required updates by December. We learned right before the show that Shively, the antenna manufacturer, has been acquired. Back in January, Howell Labs had announced it would move away from the broadcast business after 40 years to focus on new growth opportunities. Howell had acquired Shively from Ed Shively back in 1980. The buyer is American Amplifier Technologies, which was an exhibitor at the NAB show. It designs and builds broadcast and industrial electrical products, transmitters, RF power meters, audio processors, and a variety of antennas. Stephen Wild is the CEO. So now Shively products will be manufactured at the AAT facility in Sacramento, California, rather than in Maine. On a personal note, it was sad to come to an NAB show and not meet with Gary Klein, who passed away in January. A few of his friends and colleagues decided to gather and remember Gary. The NAB kindly let us use one of its conference rooms. Gary touched many people, and even though he was a hardworking and pretty intense professional, it was the stories of his friendship and personal warmth that stuck with me the most. Our group looks a little somber in this photo, but it was in fact a lovely and uplifting hour to swap stories just before we headed over to the amateur radio reception. A fun and interesting project that Gary would have appreciated was this pop-up radio station that Josh Bone and his partners created called Max Radio in the Max Connect booth. As Larry mentioned, Max Connect, one of the supporters of this webinar series. This was a full-blown studio programmed live throughout each day of the convention that focused on convention topics, music and interviews and remotes. It was carried online, but also on a Beasley HD2 FM channel in Las Vegas. The entire studio plant was WheatNet IP with wide orbit automation. A Tieline gateway codec was used for STL and remote contribution. The IP audio left the show via the gateway using the Max Connect wireless prioritized LTE service. It traveled back to Max Connect headquarters in Alabama. It was received there on a Tieline Genie distribution codec and routed through a Wheatstone system to the Surfer Network streaming encoder. And then it was also sent back via the Genie to another codec at Beasley in Las Vegas to air on that HD2 channel. The booth signal was also sent to a small transmitter on site at NAB. They even did remotes walking around the floor using a Tieline via Radio World was a partner, and I was an on-air guest at the end of each show day. So it was a lot of fun. And there's much more I could tell you about. There's a new and better streaming monitor from Innovonics. Dielectric has something interesting called a switchless switch. There's a new, lower right there, a new electromagnetic field meter from Aldina. And Enco rolled out some new tool sets that lean on Chat GPT. You can learn more about those from each of those companies, and just, of course, continue to read Radio World. I do want to give a hat tip to Steve Schultes of New York Public Radio. He's the latest recipient of Radio World's Excellence in Engineering Award. Normally, we try to present this award during the spring NAB show, and Steve wasn't able to make it to Vegas this year, but we're proud of him as our current honoree, and proud that one of our past honorees, Mike Cooney of Beasley Media Group, was honored by the NAB itself at the show. He was chosen to receive the NAB Radio Engineering Achievement Award. We featured Mike on our cover recently, and he's shown here with his boss, Carolyn Beasley, after accepting. I'm sure many of you know Mike and appreciate what a suitable choice that he is for that award. And if I can put in a plug, Radio World recently published its 100th free ebook. These cover a range of topics that will be of interest to you, including the evolution of AOIP, STLs in the 21st century, a roundup of new products, and the one that's coming out in the next week or two is about everything being available as a service now. You can find these at radioworld.com/ebooks. And please do subscribe to Radio World. There's a link on our website, or you can go to this one, tinyurl.com/rwmag. So please do. It was a busy week at the show and a lot to see. I hope I've given you a flavor of it. And I'm sincere when I say I very much appreciate being invited. So thank you, Larry, and thank you to everybody watching.
Oh yeah, thank you, Paul. You know, and I'll have your comments on this as well. The all the different new technologies and not only hardware but software as well seems to point out the importance of broadcast operations still maintaining a technical staff and a technical staff that keeps up. I mean, I heard somebody say a while back that the engineer that doesn't keep up will be out of date in just a few weeks, because it seems like things are changing sometimes almost daily. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you're right. You know, when you start to read about artificial intelligence and what it can do, and understand it on top of all of the conversations we've been having for years about the importance of understanding IT and networking, your mind goes to a couple of different places. You know, you might worry and say, well, think about what AI could do to actually take away an engineer's job. You know, I was curious about that, and so I actually typed into Chat GPT a month or two ago, and I said, what radio engineering tasks could be performed by artificial intelligence now or in the future? And it gave, you know, it was a pretty impressive list. It talked about signal analysis and optimization to analyze radio signals, equipment monitoring and maintenance, monitoring and analyzing usage patterns to predict when maintenance is required, detecting and projecting interference and resolving those issues in real time, frequency management. And yes, all that makes sense. But at the same time, I think there's a real sense among people who watch AI in general that folks who embrace it and understand it will be the survivors and the thrivers, and that the technology expertise that an engineer or a IT-minded individual either bring to this are strengths. And one fellow wrote to me, who's had a lot of letters to the editor on this topic, and one fellow wrote to me and said, the people who are going to thrive are the technology people, the engineers who understand these tools and learn to use them. So, you know, my mind goes to that. I mean, there's a lot of doomsday scenarios out there, but I don't think there's any question that technology expertise is going to continue to be important. But the nature of that expertise is changing very quickly, you know, so you're going to have to start adding an AI element to to your workshops, Larry.
Yeah, that's exactly true. Just a quick plug about our classes. We offer classes in Birmingham with our ABA Engineering Academy. We had so many people signing up that we actually added a third round. We normally did radio and television classes in the in the spring and in the fall. So now we've added a summer. As a matter of fact, we have a radio class coming up in June, week of June the 12th. And in those classes, we actually start with the history. I think it's very important for people to learn how we got to where we are today. But then we also go right into the new technologies that are out. And as a result of that, while it's actually designed for those who may be beginners or wish to learn more about the technical side of broadcasting, we have a lot of seasoned engineers attend as a refresher course, but also to learn about the new technologies, like I say, which is coming out just about every day. You have to keep up with it. So I have people ask me, well, if I take your course or if I get into engineering, will I have a job very long with all this changing? And my answer is definitely yes. You've got to have somebody that can put the equipment in, program it correctly, and then fix it when it breaks. So maybe I'm biased, having been engineering for over 50 years, but I think there'll always be a need for an engineer.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that I am well aware right now of some radio companies that are desperate to find candidates to fill open opportunities for engineers and technology people. And so it's not like there's any lack of a need. What that job will look like 5 or 10 years from now is a fascinating question, because you've still got that position where you walk in and they might say to you, well, you're responsible for our IT network and you're also responsible for our cloud-based services. But by the way, there's an AM tower out there that's still feeding a translator, and you better figure out how to keep it on the air because the lawn is looking pretty tall around the tower. You're like, well, there's a whole different conversation of skill sets there. And it's only going to continue to evolve. I mean, it's a fascinating time, but it's scary too. All these headlines certainly can make you feel a little nervous about your job.
Yeah, you're exactly right. One thing we noticed that over the years, as we began to move over to a lot of IP and IT situations in a station, initially what you had was two different departments. You had engineering over here that took care of the audio and RF, and you had IT on the other side. The problem was that I saw was that the broadcast engineer knew what those black boxes were, what they did, and how to fix them. He just didn't understand how to make them talk to each other. Across the hall, you had IT that knew how to make the boxes talk to each other. They just didn't know what they did. Well, as time has gone along, we've seen these two departments merge together. And so IT and the broadcast side has to work very close together. And like you say, it almost ends up being the same person. It has to go together. And I found out in our classes, it's sort of easier to teach an IT person the broadcast side than it is to get the broadcaster over to the IT. It goes both ways, but it seems to work. You can't, an IT guy has to really learn that side of it so that he doesn't go to the transmitter and blow himself up. I mean, you still got that type of stuff going on out there. So they either have to work together or, like you say, it ends up being the same person. One of the things that I run into in visiting stations, and I, as you know, handle the ABF inspections here in Alabama, is that the lack of qualified engineers for the small, what we normally call the mom and pop stations. They don't have the budget to have somebody on staff to maintain equipment. And I get calls almost weekly, can you recommend somebody to come? I've got a problem here. And I'm sure you see that as well.
Oh, well, indeed I do. I just a week or two ago, after hours, I was checking my work email, and there was a station manager in California who was off the air having a problem with his automation system and asking, well, pleading with me to try to help him find somebody quickly who could. He's like, I'm off the air. It was my after hours for me, and I don't have a directory right at my fingertips of available contract engineers in his area, but I was able to point them to some resources that might help. You know, the SBE website has a list of contractor and consulting engineers broken down by state. I was able to find the name of the local SBE chapter chairman and say that maybe this person could help you find a local resource. You know, and of course, more and more supplier support services become important. And you hear suppliers, the manufacturers of these products, developing or building out and talking about their service support as a more important consideration. I mean, Telos has been doing this a lot lately, talking about that. And you heard me mention one of the companies in here, that the EAS companies that have a software assurance plan. You know, you're building for that eventuality where if something goes wrong, you cannot assume that there is somebody technical available really quickly to help you on your end of things. So the supplier is at least providing that as an option, you know, and those are important. For this ebook that I mentioned that I'm about to put out on everything as a service, one of the conversations that keeps coming up is when you're buying the service in the first place and choosing the vendor, what questions to ask about the service level agreement and what assurances you have that if there's a problem, you can get it fixed quickly. Or that you get the software update when it comes out. What happens if the vendor goes out of business? What happens if my service support plan runs out? How do I get help? You know, those are all questions that you need to be thinking about. So I think you're right. I think the need for technical expertise isn't going to go away, but the kind of questions that are being asked changes.
I think there's a few, and you may be aware of them, a few of the transmitter manufacturers actually has what they call phone home. It actually connects via the internet back to their facility.
Yes.
And they can monitor your transmitter. And I actually had an engineer tell me one time that he came to work one morning and there was a FedEx box on his desk, and he opened it up and there was a muffin fan in there. And he said, "What the heck is this?" And he calls the manufacturer and they said, "What is this muffin fan for?" "Oh, our system noticed that you had one of the muffin fans was beginning to have some problems, and so we just went ahead and sent you a new one." And he didn't even know it. So now that's pretty good to have that type of relationship with the company.
Yeah, I suppose that is good, and that kind of service, I think, we've seen more and more of this kind of thing coming out. Creative thinking by suppliers to provide those services. I think you'll see more of it being commoditized and monetized, and I think you'll hear more manufacturers who are offering these kind of things, you know, under the rubric of as a service, but basically ways to put your mind at ease, and you can go to bed at night and not worry too much. That's pretty impressive, though. If the transmitter ordered its own replacement part.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. I noticed a chat came up that somebody had said they had heard that BW Broadcast had been purchased, or have you heard that? Or
I haven't heard the latest. I haven't had a recent announcement from BW. We've been waiting to hear what might come about with the company. Let me see if I have a recent update for you here. But no, I haven't heard a recent announcement about that.
so I think all these changes, really, engineers should not be worried about them. I think the companies that are buying the different companies are going to support them and maybe even improve on the product somewhat.
Yeah. Now I just did a quick check on my own index, and you know, we had reported earlier when they shuttered their doors temporarily, but I haven't heard an update to that business story. So we'll report on it if we hear of anything.
Okay. Well, Paul, I sure appreciate you being with us today. That was very enlightening, and I'm glad you touched on the part about networking, because that's so in our business today. I mean, you can, if you're a member of the SBE and you go to the local chapter, you can network there at the local chapter, but so many people are there sort of by themselves. They don't have anybody to talk to, and being able to network with other engineers and vendors is so important.
Well, it's good. It's good for us as human beings. I'll be the first to confess, I don't love a convention experience. The travel is wearing. I need, you know, the time that I spend at the show. I really would be much rather at home working or with my family. But once I get there, I remember not just how much great information there is, but how many friends I have in the industry and how important it is to interact with them, particularly after a pandemic, particularly when I haven't seen them for a number of years. And you know, over time, that's a treasured part of a person's career. I know a lot of broadcast companies used to send fleets of engineers, and now they won't send anybody, or they only send a couple of people. And I do think it's well worth it if a person can afford it themselves to continue to go, even if they have to pay their own way, because there is that whole, you build your own personal network, you build your own support system. And that's, you know, you saw some of those pictures. Those people are old friends and they support one another through tough times. So I don't know. I'm preaching now.
Yeah, I know. But we sure do appreciate you being with us and sharing the information that you gave to us today.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate being asked.
Okay, I want to remind everybody that our next meeting will actually be on a Wednesday instead of a Tuesday because of some scheduling conflicts. So the next webinar will actually be June 21st. That will be the third Wednesday of June. This webinar has been recorded and will actually be available on our ABA Engineering Academy YouTube site sometime this afternoon. If you don't have the address, just go to YouTube and type in ABA Engineering Academy, and you'll see not only this one, but the previous webinars that we have had as well. So we want to thank everybody for joining, and we'll see you again next month.